Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Quick portal update focusing on guys in the NBA draft that could come back. And if there's any real recruiting buzz about them, for some of these guys, there is certainly some more than others. Let's focus on probably the biggest name in the portal that is also still in the NBA draft. That is Coleman Hawkins from Illinois. We've talked about him a lot. If you are not a diehard college basketball fan, if you just focus on your specific school and your specific school is not Illinois, you probably know a little bit about this kid. But one thing I would say about him, don't let the stats totally fool you. 6'10" forward, just finished his fourth year at Illinois, averaged 12 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists per game, 37% shooting from three. Now, I know what people say, oh, that's not that impressive. It's not that big of a deal. Well, first of all, he dealt with tendonitis all year long. And two, he was pretty clearly like the second best player on a team that won the Big Ten tournament, finished second in the Big Ten regular season, and made the Elite Eight. He is a very good college basketball player, had some incredible games, including 30 points against Iowa, 20-7 against Minnesota, 22 against Northwestern on the road, 22-13, 21-10 against Michigan. So he is a very good college basketball player. He is in the NBA draft. He's trending as a second-round pick to potentially undrafted. And so I think of everybody, there is frankly probably more than anyone. He is a guy that really is on the fence because he can come back and make really good money in NIL, but he also might just be done with college basketball. But what's interesting about him, and this is what I find fascinating about the Coleman Hawkins situation, is that I think there are times that basically, a kid enters the transfer portal and he kind of does it to protect himself, and he's not really planning on coming back to college basketball. We'll get to a couple of those guys in a minute. What's interesting about Coleman Hawkins is that when he entered the portal, I do think there was a belief from people in basketball circles, okay, he's just protecting himself, but he's not coming back to college basketball. Then he's done a few interviews since he entered the portal. And I'll tell you this, I think there's actually a very good chance he's coming back to college basketball, but here's the twist. He has basically said he is not going back to Illinois. He's basically said, look, they've rebuilt their roster, assuming that I'd be gone. And I don't think it's really fair to them, to the players that were brought in to replace me, if I just show up, I'm back, and I take all your minutes. So it feels like Coleman Hawkins, if he comes back, and I would say probably more than 60-40 that he does come back, that he is going to come back and not go back to Illinois, which sets up a fascinating, essentially free agency period. In terms of his recruitment, listen, I think there are two schools that really stand out to me in terms of who would essentially be the favorites to get him. The first one, I do think North Carolina. Listen, North Carolina is desperate for another big. Now, he isn't the traditional back-to-the-basket big that is going to, dump the ball down to him, a Hunter Dickinson and Armando Bacot or whatever. But they just need another big body, and they seem to be very active and very focused on getting one. It's worth noting they've raised a bunch of NIL money that has not been spent. Remember, when Cliff Omoyori committed to Alabama, the reports were that North Carolina actually had the bigger NIL offer, but Omoyori saw himself as the missing piece for a championship team at Alabama and reportedly took less money. So North Carolina needs another big body, has the NIL money. Now, again, I think in a perfect world, they would love a more traditional 5-man. I think he's more of a stretch 5 that's really better as a 4. He can play a small ball 5, but probably is better as a 4. But I think North Carolina has to be deemed the favorite. The other team that I think is getting a lot of buzz with Coleman Hawkins, it is the Arkansas Razorbacks. And Arkansas, and we're going to talk about DJ Wagner here momentarily, but Arkansas, I believe, basically right now they're still only at 7 players, right? And I think that I actually like the front court pieces that they have, Jonas Adu and Big Z at the 5. Adu Thiero, I think, is better as a small ball 4 than he is as a 3. That also opens up the fact for Carter Knox to play the 3 spot. But of course, Coach Cal, he's going to go big game hunting. And there's real buzz that if Coleman Hawkins comes back to college, that Arkansas could be a fit there. Again, I would rather see Adu at the 4 and Carter Knox at the 3. I think in that case, you would play Coleman Hawkins at the 4 and Adu at the 3. But there's a lot of buzz with Arkansas. There was some Louisville buzz. I think Louisville's just running out of spots, man. They took the Kayshawn Pryor kid, big man from USF that can stretch the floor, shoot threes. They also just took Frank Anselm, who ironically was actually Coleman Hawkins' high school teammate at Prolific Prep, but Frank Anselm from Georgia. So I don't really think that Louisville is a threat anymore. I would put it at a North Carolina versus Arkansas situation. And I would probably give the edge to North Carolina right now. Obviously, Arkansas is not getting outbid, but North Carolina needs a big guy. And so I would be curious to see if North Carolina is the favorite if he decides to come back. Really quickly, let me send out a tweet here. Forgive me. All right, so let's get back to it. So Coleman Hawkins is probably, in my opinion, the biggest name. Let's get to another really interesting name that I do think is actually trending towards North Carolina. And that is a player that I think a lot of people will be familiar with on this show. That is a gentleman named Ugonna Onyenso. Okay, so Ugonna Onyenso played at Kentucky these past 2 years. Developmental kid, dealt with an injury, hurt his foot last offseason, so his development was stunted. But at the end of the day, he's kind of a limited, back to the basket kind of center. Average 5 points, about 6 boards, and this is the interesting part, about 3 blocks per game in 18 minutes of play. So credit to him because he is a true athlete and rim protector, not a great offensive player, but he's one, he entered the NBA draft, and the insinuation at the time was like, he's entering the draft and he ain't coming back. But he has obviously gone through the draft process, and it feels like, just with the economics of college basketball, that it makes it a little bit more likely that he could come back. Told Adam Zagori at the NBA Draft Combine that probably about 6-7 schools still involved. Oklahoma was in the mix. He listed Bama. Bama doesn't have a spot for him. He's not going to Bama. But I think North Carolina is the other one. I think North Carolina is going to end up with either Ugonna Onyenso or Coleman Hawkins. Even if Coleman Hawkins doesn't come back, I think Onyenso would make sense there. But like I said, they just need another big guy. They need a 5. And so in my opinion, I would expect Ugonna Onyenso to end up at North Carolina. Believe Georgetown is involved as well. Now, Ugonna Onyenso is not a guy that's going to play like 32 minutes a game. But I will say, I think if he's playing 10, 12 minutes a game as either a starting center that you kind of sub out or a backup center or a rim protector, I think he has a lot of value. We'll be curious if he ends up at North Carolina. A couple names that we haven't really talked about on this show. And they're both guys that I think could end up staying in the draft. I do want to hit on them really quick because I've got a few questions on them. Jaylen Wells from Washington State and Cam Christie from Minnesota. So Jaylen Wells, a fascinating story. So he started at D2 Sonoma State University. Okay. For people who don't know Sonoma, it's in Arizona, not to be confused, or Sedona is in Arizona. Sonoma is in California. And Sonoma is known for one thing, and it ain't basketball. It's wine country. It's like peak wine country. And so when I picture this kid, he played at Sonoma State, ended up going to Washington State this past year. But when I picture this kid at Sonoma State, I just envision him almost in like a field of dreams, like he's playing in a basketball gym that's in the middle of a wine field or whatever. But he goes to Washington State this year, and he was excellent. 13 points per game, 42% three-point shooting, a 6'8" forward. And he had maybe his best game in Washington State's biggest game, 27 points in a win over Arizona. So this kid can play at the highest level. I really like him. I think he's actually very good. I don't know that he's coming back to college basketball, though. Very interesting player. I think I actually saw an interview with him at the NBA Draft Combine where he said, look, I'm not even personally fielding calls right now. I'm letting my agent handle all that. It's not my spot. I'm focused on the NBA draft. If I don't like the draft process, then I will start the process when I come back to college. He's a really good player. I started putting together my top 100 players that have been in the portal all offseason. I think he's like a top 15 guy. Another top 15 guy in the portal that I just don't think is coming back to college basketball. Have not talked about him this spring. Cam Christie from Minnesota. Interesting story. Brother was a one-and-done player at Michigan State, now plays with the Los Angeles Lakers. And Cam Christie was really good in college basketball for a bad team that not a lot of people watched. He played at Minnesota, averaged 11.5 points per game as a freshman, and as a 6'8" forward, shot like 39% from three. So 11 points per game, 39% from three in the Big Ten as a freshman. That's a dude that could play. We can make fun of the Big Ten. You average 11.5 per game, 38% or 39% from three as a freshman, you can play. So very good player. But like I said, right now there is no real buzz on him coming back to college. I would expect him to ultimately stay in the NBA draft. He is a guy that is on draft boards. Coleman Hawkins is kind of that fringe. Is he going to get drafted? Is he not going to get drafted? Jaylen Wells, kind of that fringe. Is he going to get drafted? Is he not going to get drafted? I think if Cam Christie stays in, he will get drafted. Now, again, maybe the NIL money's good. Maybe you can go someplace and have an impact right away. I would expect him to be drafted. A couple other names, guys we've talked about. Listen, Jaxson Robinson, I don't believe as of this moment that there is some new update that we are not aware of. I've said it from the beginning. Played 4 years of college basketball, got his degree. I think in a perfect world, he would like to stay in the NBA draft. We're waiting to see if he's good enough to get drafted. And if he is, I think he's going to stay in the NBA draft. If he isn't, then I think he's coming back to college, and I think Kentucky should be deemed the favorite. Now, I think there was some miscommunication on this show a few days ago because I saw some people saying that Torres said that he's going to BYU if he comes back. That's not what I said at all. What I said was, I think BYU is in a better spot than people realize. NBA head coach comes from the NBA, was a lead assistant for the Phoenix Suns. They're going to run an NBA system, and they have plenty of NIL money, okay? Plenty of NIL money. And so I think BYU is in better shape than people realize, but I would still say Kentucky's the favorite. Go there, be the star, biggest stage in college basketball. Mark Pope turned you into an all Big 12 player, but ultimately, I do still think he is a guy that is probably going to stay in the draft if he thinks he'll get drafted. The good news is, again, we will see in the coming days. Chaz Lanier, I don't think there's any real update on Chaz Lanier either. Took his visit to Tennessee. Feels like it's sort of trending more towards Tennessee than it is for Kentucky. Maybe there's been a commitment. I've been on air for over close to an hour now. I don't know if there's been a commitment since then. Feels like it's maybe trending a little bit towards Tennessee. I said it the other day with BYU, same deal. I don't think BYU's in the mix. I think they think they're a distant third, but NIL money is not going to be an issue. But Chaz Lanier, we freaking led the show with Chaz Lanier the other day. That's how slow that Monday show was. But Chaz Lanier is one of the big names still in there. 19 points per game, 44% three-point shooting. And I think he is very good. But we will see what happens with him.